The third scream didn't come from a camper. It came from the lion. A real one. Somewhere past the tree line, deep-throated, and raw enough to stop 25 trespassers mid-s'more with their mouths hanging open. I was already walking downhill when I heard it. Shotgun slung casually over one shoulder, coffee still hot in my free hand. They had brought tents, coolers, Bluetooth speakers, and a karaoke machine onto my private island. HOA President Karen had called it a community wellness retreat. I called it trespassing. And now they were about to learn what happens when a neighborhood tyrant turns your sanctuary into a circus without knowing you have 7 fully legal lions living there. What kind of person decides to hold a surprise camping trip on someone else's island? Better question. What kind of idiot thinks they can survive it? It started with a flashing motion alert on my trail cam feed. 1 ping, then 2, then 25, in a slow procession like ants poring over a log. My cameras covered most of the western trails near the dock, and suddenly there they were. Faces I didn't recognize, hauling coolers, tents, and folding chairs through the underbrush like they were moving in for the weekend. I set my mug down carefully, the porch creaking beneath my boots as I stood. My private island, 43 acres of thick pine, rolling moss beds, and protected wildlife corridors, had just been invaded, and not quietly. One camper was already dragging a Bluetooth speaker behind them, blaring acoustic pop covers like it was a resort. I recognized her last. Karen, HOA President Karen. Clipboard in one hand, wide-brimmed sun hat in the other, and that feral glint in her eye that meant she was playing queen of something again. I didn't even bother with the boat. I knew she wouldn't be on it anymore. She must have told the ferry to leave and come back tomorrow. Of course she did. Of course she would. I grabbed the long-range radio and slung it over my shoulder along with a field pack, water, binoculars, paperwork, and began the hike down the ridgeline toward the intruders. The trail was damp and overgrown, leaves still slick from the morning fog. I hadn't had visitors in over 2 years, and certainly not this many. No one came here without permission. No one ever dared. This land wasn't part of any neighborhood. I made damn sure of that. It had its own title, its own deed, its own set of conservation rules. I'd bought it outright when I retired, choosing isolation over HOA meddling. But Karen had other ideas. I emerged from the tree line about an hour later to find a full-blown base camp spread across the western meadow. 25 people, maybe more. Families with toddlers, teenagers tossing frisbees, someone hanging a tie-dye sheet between 2 trees like it was a music festival. The smell of hot dogs and citronella already clung to the air. And at the center of it all, sitting in a camp chair like she'd discovered the damn new world, was Karen. "Good morning, neighbor," she called out, lifting her thermos like it was a peace offering. "We appreciate your hospitality. What a lovely space for the HOA's wellness retreat." I didn't answer. Not at first. I just stared. Because laid out in front of me were 3 illegal fire pits, 7 tents within 10 feet of a restricted wildlife buffer, and a composting toilet system someone had half buried next to a blackberry thicket that was a known den site for the smaller lions. "This is private property," I said slowly, every word carrying weight. "Private, not public, not communal, not owned by the HOA. What the hell are you doing here?" Karen stood with exaggerated grace, brushing off the back of her linen pants. "Oh, I know what the sign says," she said sweetly. "But you didn't read the latest newsletter, did you? Page 6, small print. We've extended stewardship boundaries under Section 13B of the Community Expansion Act. The board unanimously agreed it was time to connect isolated resources with the community. You're welcome." I blinked. "The what now?" She handed me a printed copy of the newsletter. It was laughable. Half of it was budget reports and HOA party photos. But buried near the bottom, in some ridiculous faux legalese font, was a line about adjacent properties being encouraged to participate in seasonal community engagement programs. No vote, no approval. Just a suggestion. And now she had spun that into seizing my island for a retreat. "You trespassed," I said flatly. "All 25 of you, and you sent the ferry away. So let me be clear. You're stuck here until tomorrow, and you're here without permission. Karen gave me that practiced condescending look she usually saved for board meetings. "It's one night," she said. "Just a team-building experience, a nature reset. Everyone's so burnt out. The HOA needed this. You should feel honored, really. Your land was chosen unanimously." I looked around again. Kids were stomping through the underbrush. Someone had set up a volleyball net between two ancient oaks. A man in a Hawaiian shirt was urinating behind a bush that led directly to the lion enclosure perimeter. My jaw clenched. "There are dangerous animals here," I warned. "Wildlife, protected enclosures. You have no idea what you've just walked into." Karen laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, come on," she said. "You mean the rumors? The lion sanctuary? Please. We all know that's just a story you tell to keep people away. Some rustic scare tactic. Honestly, I'm impressed." It worked for a while. "It's not a story," I said coldly. 7 lions. Federally licensed. This land is an active conservation site. She waved a hand, like I'd said I raised chickens. "Well, they seem to be doing fine wherever they are. We haven't seen a single paw print. Besides, the HOA voted. The wellness retreat takes priority." My radio buzzed lightly, motion alert near the eastern rise. Probably a curious lion checking on the commotion. They weren't aggressive by nature, but they were territorial, and this wasn't normal. I scanned the campers. They were unpacking more gear. A propane stove hissed near the center of camp. A group of teenagers were already carving initials into tree bark with pocket knives. The tension in my gut didn't come from fear. It came from certainty. Certainty that this was going to spiral, and fast. The first sign came that evening. Around dusk, a camper named Lori ran up to Karen pale and breathless. "There's something in the woods," she said. "It's big. I saw yellow eyes." Karen patted her on the shoulder. "Probably just a raccoon. The woods play tricks on your mind after sunset." But she looked at me while she said it. "And she saw the way?" I didn't laugh. After that came the missing food. Coolers rifled through, a torn backpack, a noise like something heavy brushing the tent walls. Karen deflected each incident with growing irritation. "This is a wellness retreat," she snapped at one point. "We're here to connect. Maybe if people spent less time being dramatic and more time doing breathing exercises, we'd be fine." That night the growls started. Not loud, not close, but deep, earthy, ancient. A reminder from the dark that not all things on this island obeyed her clipboard. Karen went to sleep anyway, curled in her oversized tent with solar lanterns flickering like a ward against the truth. The campers followed her lead, but I didn't sleep. I sat in the woods with my monitor, watching the lions move, curious but calm. For now, they wouldn't attack, not unprovoked. But their land had been disturbed, and I knew one thing Karen didn't. Lions don't ask for permission. They just remind you who was here first. By morning, the panic had matured into whispers. They didn't shout, not yet. But the silence had weight. Every camper's eyes darted sideways as they walked to the water or checked their coolers, which now sat half-emptied with claw marks no raccoon could make. Breakfast was dry cereal and uneasy stares. Karen emerged from her tent freshly powdered and furious, wielding a clipboard like a sword and demanding positive attitudes and intentional mindfulness. She'd gotten wind of the hushed conversations about strange noises, heavy pacing outside tents, low huffing exhales that rumbled too deep to be a deer. One woman swore she'd seen glowing yellow eyes just beyond the fire pit around 3 a.m. Another claimed something massive brushed the nylon of her tent, its breath fogging up the mesh window. Karen dismissed them all. "There are no wild animals here," she insisted, hands on her hips, the morning sun catching on her rhinestone sunglasses. "What you're hearing are raccoons, possibly a feral pig. The woods have echoes. That's all. People need to stop fear-mongering. It's bad energy." I stood a few feet away, arms crossed, not saying much. But when she turned to me, sharp, daring me to contradict her, I said 5 words that changed the tone of the entire camp. "They've breached the enclosure perimeter." She scoffed, loud and theatrical. "The imaginary lines again?" I held her gaze. They're not imaginary. I have 7 African lions on this property, legally owned, federally permitted, monitored and housed in reinforced natural enclosures on the eastern third of the island. If any of them are outside that zone, it's because someone crossed a boundary they shouldn't have. That shut people up. Some started packing. A few looked toward the woods. Karen smirked like I'd just told a ghost story to scare children. "Well," she said, "we'll just stay on this side of the island then." But it was too late. I saw it in the way people now walked in pairs, kept close to the fire, and jumped at every snapping twig. I hadn't meant to stir panic, I'd meant to warn. And if she had let me, I would have explained. I would have told them that this island wasn't just a retirement fantasy. It was a conservation sanctuary, privately licensed under the Wildlife and Endangered Species Stewardship Act. I spent 5 years petitioning, meeting with federal biologists, constructing specialized fencing zones reinforced with underground plates and triple-lock gates. Each lion had a GPS tracker. Each path had motion cams. I had studied their lineage, their patterns, their instincts. My lions were not pets. They were survivors, rescued from abuse, circuses, illegal breeding programs. My job wasn't just to protect them. It was to protect idiots like Karen from their own arrogance. But she didn't want the truth. She wanted control. And what she did next nearly got everyone killed. Around noon, while the campers were gathered for some mandatory intentional connection circle by the lake, Karen wandered off, said she was looking for a calm space to meditate. I didn't follow her. I should have. Maybe then I would have caught her before she climbed the eastern slope, before she ducked under the yellow warning tape, before she decided that the "No Trespassing Wildlife Habitat" sign was a bluff. I saw it later on the playback when I reviewed the security feed. Karen in her ridiculous athleisure joggers, phone in one hand, using her clipboard to push through brush and duck under a reinforced cable fence. The gate had a sensor, a manual lock, and a backup chain latch. Karen managed to unlatch one and leave the other 2 tangled. Not enough to throw it wide open, but enough for a lion to nose it the rest of the way. She never saw the lion. Not then. She left after 5 minutes, probably proud of herself for debunking the myth. But at 2:17 p.m., Motion Cam East 6A pinged. A blur of tan fur and muscle slipping into the tree line. Slow and calm and curious. Her name was Naira. She was the matriarch. The quiet one. The one who liked her space. The one who didn't like change. I grabbed my gear, activated the internal trackers, and radioed the rescue team hotline just in case. I didn't go to Karen. I went straight into the woods, scanning prints, trying to coax Naira back with bait and pheromone cues. But by the time I'd found her trail near the berry grove, the camp had erupted. A scream cut through the air like a siren. Campers were running. One tripped over a tent line. Another threw their marshmallow skewer like it was a javelin. I emerged from the trees just as Naira padded into the clearing near the beach, calm and majestic. She didn't growl. She didn't charge. She just stood there, watching the chaos. And then she turned her golden eyes directly toward Karen. That's when the screaming stopped. Karen froze mid-step, half out of her camp chair, lips parted in shock. Naira took 2 slow steps forward, unblinking. Then she sat, right in the sand. A queen taking her throne. She didn't bare her teeth. She didn't flick her tail. She just stared, her massive paws sunk in the sand, a low breath exhaling from her nose like the wind itself had grown a spine. Karen backed up, fast, tripping over a cooler and landing hard on her ass in the sand. "Do something!" she shrieked. "It's your lion!" But I didn't move. Not yet. "She's not attacking," I said calmly. "She's observing. You're on her land now." The other campers were pale, silent, inching backward toward the woods or behind cars they couldn't drive anywhere. There was no ferry, no cell signal, no one to call, just the lion and me, and the woman who had dared invade a predator's sanctuary with a tent, a speaker, and a clipboard. Naira blinked slowly, turned her head, and padded toward the tree line again, disappearing into the brush like a ghost. Only then did people breathe. Only then did I walk forward and help Karen up. She slapped my hand away. "This is your fault," she spat, still shaking. "You're endangering lives. You're going to be liable." I leaned close, voice low enough that only she could hear it. "You opened her gate. You ignored my warnings. And if anyone else gets hurt, I'll make sure the only thing you're liable for is your own prison sentence under the Endangered Species Protection Act." She didn't speak, couldn't, because suddenly the whole camp was staring at her differently, not like a leader, like bait. And the forest around us wasn't empty. It was breathing, watching, waiting. And this time, it wasn't going to stay quiet. Karen made the call with shaking fingers, dialing the sheriff from her satellite phone like she was reporting a terrorist attack. Her voice was shrill, deliberate, and weaponized for theater. "Yes. I'm on a private island. No, I'm trapped on a private island with 25 residents from the Lakeside HOA. There's a man here. Frankly, a lunatic who's keeping lions. Yes, real lions. No, I don't believe he's licensed. They're roaming free. We're all in danger." I stood 5 feet away the entire time, arms folded, jaw tight, letting her dig her own grave in real time. I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. I had the permits already laid out in a folder labeled, "For the Uninformed." The deputy sheriff, a man named Merritt with a gut and a clipboard and zero tolerance for drama, arrived 2 hours later via private fishing boat. Apparently, Karen had dropped the word hostage situation enough times to flag the county dispatch. The sky was already grumbling when he stepped ashore, the wind wet and humid and rolling in off the eastern edge like a held breath. "Who's in charge here?" Merritt asked, stepping onto the dock with mud already crusting his boots. "I am," Karen said, marching forward. "I'm the HOA president of Lakeside View Estates, and I demand you remove that man and those animals immediately. He's endangering lives. He's keeping lions, actual lions, like some kind of psychopath zookeeper." Merritt looked at her, then looked at me. "You the landowner?" he asked. "Yes," I said, handing him the thick envelope. "Title, coordinates, conservation permits, wildlife licenses from both the state and federal departments. You'll find the GPS tag serials listed on page 4. He flipped through them slowly, methodically, pausing at the Department of Wildlife seal. "You're legal," he said finally. "Very legal." He looked back at Karen. "Ma'am, this isn't HOA jurisdiction. This man's land is privately held and fully permitted for large exotic wildlife, under Title 12B. You and everyone else here are technically trespassing." But he's endangering us," Karen stammered, eyes wide and bloodshot. That lion stared at me. "Did it bite anyone?" "No." "Did it charge?" "Well, no, but—" "Then we're done here," Merritt said, snapping the folder shut and tucking it under his arm. "No laws broken. You should be thankful these animals haven't acted out, considering you're on their turf." Karen's mouth opened, then shut. Around us, the wind picked up. The water in the cove turned slate gray. The first low roll of thunder sounded like a god clearing his throat. Merritt turned to me. "You want them gone?" he asked. "I'd prefer it. They ignored property lines, tampered with restricted areas, disrupted the habitat." "Understood. I'll note it in the report." "You'll want that for court when you press charges." "Already planning to." "Good man." He tipped his hat, stepped back onto his boat, and left without a backward glance. The moment he vanished beyond the bend of trees and mist, reality set in for the campers. They turned, all of them, toward Karen. The shift was visible, like a school of fish changing direction all at once. No more trust, no more groupthink. Just 25 pissed-off people realizing they'd been led into a lion's den by a woman who brought no exit strategy and no apology. "Where's the boat?" someone asked. Karen tried to laugh, but it came out more like a cough. "It'll be back tomorrow morning," I told them one night. "You mean we can't leave until tomorrow?" a woman shrieked. "You told me we could come and go." "That was the plan," Karen said weakly, adjusting her sun hat even though the clouds were rolling in fast. "But there were budget concerns. Chartering another trip was, well, not in the retreat funds." A bolt of lightning cracked behind the hills. Not close, Not yet, but enough to make people flinch. The wind surged and kicked up the edge of a canopy tent. Somewhere in the woods, a low rumble, not thunder, vibrated the air. One of the lions, I knew. Not charging, not angry. Just announcing herself. The storm was coming. So were they. The lions didn't stay still when weather turned. They became restless, predictive, moved in long elliptical patterns, checking their borders. Naira, Kovu, Saidi, all of them would be circling, visible only by rustling brush, snapped twigs, the sudden sound of something breathing just outside the ring of firelight. The campers were noticing. They weren't sleeping anymore. They were huddling together in the central clearing, eyes darting to the tree line. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. Every branch crack could have been a paw. "This is your fault," one man barked at Karen. "You brought us here." "You told us this was a safe spiritual retreat," another added. "You said it was just a camping trip." Karen was pale, her lips pressed thin. "I didn't know he had real lions," she hissed. "I thought it was a story, some weirdo off the grid myth." I stepped closer, dropping the first printed photo onto the center table, a trail cam still of Karen ducking under the yellow wildlife tape, just minutes before she compromised the gate. "You mean this part?" I asked. "Where you entered the restricted enclosure zone?" Gasps rippled through the group. I didn't wait for her reply. I placed another photo, then another. Drone shots of campers setting up tents inside protected habitat areas. Sound recordings of Bluetooth speakers blasting at volumes that disturb the wildlife. Pictures of torn coolers, illegally dug fire pits, a kid riding on one of the enclosure fences like it was a jungle gym. "I've documented everything," I said calmly. "Every step, every minute, infractions, trespass, environmental damage, gate tampering. You didn't just break the rules, you violated a federally protected ecosystem." "You're threatening us?" Karen snapped. "No," I said. "I'm preserving my land, you're the threat." The sky split open with thunder, closer now. The first droplets of rain hit the leaves like soft warnings. Campers scattered, grabbing rain covers, dragging their tents back under trees. But I saw it in their eyes. They didn't care about the rain anymore. They were trapped on a wet island with lions. And they had no one to blame but the woman who had convinced them this would be a wellness weekend. I didn't go back to my cabin. I stayed in the woods, cloak pulled tight, drone controller in hand. The air smelled of ozone and wet pine. In the distance, I caught a glimpse of Kovu, padding near the eastern ridge, head low, eyes scanning the shadows. He wasn't hunting, he was guarding. The lions knew their land had been violated. They wouldn't harm without cause, but they would not disappear either, not until order was restored. In the clearing, a tent collapsed. People shouted. Karen barked orders, trying to sound in control, but her voice cracked with each demand. She was losing them. The clipboard had lost its power. All that remained was the storm, the truth, and the predators, watching from just beyond the edge, and me. With every gust of wind, with every flash of lightning, I documented more. Not because I was angry, because I was ready. Tomorrow, the ferry would return. But so would the law. And this time, no one would be leaving untouched. Sunrise came hard and fast. The sky bleeding orange over the treetops as the storm broke apart and the mist burned off like steam from the ground. The island looked clean again, washed, raw, honest. But beneath that soft morning light was the wreckage of a siege, collapsed tents, burned out fire pits, muddy trails where campers had tried to flee their own hubris. And at the center of it all, Karen, still pretending she was in control. Her hair was a frizzed crown of desperation, her voice cracking as she gave one last attempt at a mandatory group reflection beside a folding table sagging with wet granola bars and broken lanterns. But no one listened anymore. They weren't even pretending. They watched the horizon instead, waiting for the boat. I gave them something better. At 6:47 a.m., the rumble echoed over the canopy, a distant chop-chop-chop of rotor blades cutting through the dawn. Karen looked up first, squinting into the sun like she was waiting for God to rescue her. She got something else. A UH-60 airlift chopper, marked with federal wildlife insignia, and 2 personnel in orange jumpsuits, ready to assess environmental damage and execute emergency conservation response protocol. It didn't land. Not at first. It circled, hovering like judgment, while I stood on the beach with a raised signal panel and a folder of hell in my hand. My laptop was already hot, satellite link bouncing signal through a secure mesh relay I'd built into the comms tower 3 years ago. One click filed the full suite. A federal wildlife interference complaint. Trespassing with malicious habitat impact. Illegal occupation of conservation land. Civil damages filed at $2.3 million. The app confirmed. Complaint number 337CX, filed under my credentials because that's what Karen never knew. I wasn't just the weird recluse with a permit and a fence line. I was a former federal wildlife enforcement officer, retired from active field duty, dual barred and licensed in land use law. I'd prosecuted poachers on 3 continents. I'd shut down backdoor zoo deals, brokered rescues across state lines, and written the kind of environmental enforcement briefs that made senators twitch. This island was never just property. It was a fortress. And she'd broken in. The chopper descended. Campers fled its spray like roaches in floodlight. Karen stood her ground, arms wide, screaming something about false imprisonment and harassment by helicopter. She didn't notice the second craft coming in lower and faster from the east, a chartered legal courier drone, dropping a hard copy packet in a sealed container directly into my hands. I walked toward her with that container tucked under one arm, drone still hovering overhead as if waiting for applause. "Karen Withers," I said, calm as stone. "You are being served. This is a federal suit filed with the Department of Interior, the U.S. Wildlife and Habitat Preservation Authority, and the State Environmental Office. You have violated no fewer than 8 conservation statutes, including 3 with felony-level provisions. You compromised a protected species enclosure. You endangered human lives. You led a group of unregistered individuals onto private sovereign habitat, resulting in property destruction, bio-waste contamination, and a loss of biological integrity that could take years to repair. In layman's terms, you messed with the wrong lions." She sputtered. Actually sputtered. You can't. This is absurd." But the moment she reached for the container, a third vehicle landed. This one, a federal wildlife enforcement transport boat, 2 uniformed officers stepping out. One with cuffs already drawn. "Karen Withers?" the taller one asked. "You've been named in a federal complaint. Step away from the group. Hands visible." "You can't be serious," she shrieked, flailing backward. "He's insane. He's holding us hostage with wild animals. This is a cult. He lured us here." "You planned the retreat?" one officer replied, reading from the incident report. "You instructed the ferry to leave. You entered a restricted wildlife enclosure. You're on drone footage, removing protective locks. You're on file, ignoring verbal warnings from the registered landowner. We have witness statements, environmental damage logs, and active footage of your group tampering with federally protected terrain. Ma'am, we are very serious." The cuffs clicked shut a moment later, and Karen collapsed to her knees, shrieking like she'd been shot. "I am the HOA! You can't arrest the HOA!" "Ma'am," the agent said flatly, "you're trespassing in lion country, and lions follow federal law. I didn't move. I didn't gloat. I just watched as they marched her past the tents, past the stunned campers, and loaded her into the boat like a piece of spoiled meat. It wasn't over. Not yet." The rest of the group was rounded up, statements taken, IDs photographed. 4 of them were cited for trespassing. 2 were hit with misdemeanor conservation violations for attempting to burn refuse within protected moss biomes. 1 guy was slapped with a 7-0 fine for trying to fish in the restricted lake zone. The ferry finally arrived by 9 a.m., and for the first time in 2 days, nobody fought for seats. They just boarded in silence, faces white, shoulders hunched, clutching their phones and ruined gear like trauma totems. Karen didn't get to board. The feds kept her. I heard later she was booked under Federal Statute 47.1b. Endangered species disturbance with intent to alter habitat. A felony. She'd lawyer up. She'd try to spin it. But the footage was already online. My trail cams, my drones, her screaming face in the sand while Naira watched her from 10 feet away, unblinking, regal still. The internet did what it does best. Lionbait Karen was born. Memes, reaction videos, TikTok scored with jungle drums and captions like, "She tried to find the food chain." By the end of the week, the HOA had dissolved. Emergency vote. Complete board recall. Their insurance provider refused to cover the suit. Donations dried up. The website was taken offline. Karen's house went up for sale, below asking. No bids. A former board member tried to throw her under the bus in a podcast interview, claiming she unilaterally organized the retreat and that the rest of the HOA was unaware of the island's predator population. I made sure the podcast got copies of my permits. They aired them, laminated and zoomed in, while playing lion roars in the background. National coverage picked it up. Suburban HOA president arrested for trespassing in lion sanctuary. CNN gave me a 2-minute segment. A journalist from Outside Magazine asked for an interview. I declined. Let the story be enough. I'd done what needed to be done. A week later, I walked the island alone. No more campers, no more trash, no more tents sagging like wet regrets in the trees. Just pine needles, birdsong, and the distant rumble of paws in the brush, calm now, paced, proud. Naira appeared near the southern trail, her body moving like liquid across the grass. She saw me, didn't stop, didn't stare, just gave one long blink and moved on, satisfied. I walked to the cliffside deck I'd built myself 5 years ago, the one that overlooked the cove and the skyline beyond. I poured a fresh mug of black coffee, leaned on the railing, and breathed in the salt and silence. The air was cool, still, untouched again. The HOA was dead. The lions were safe. And in the end, some predators had proven far more civil than the self-appointed queen of suburbia. Karen thought she could conquer my sanctuary with a clipboard and a vote. But lions don't follow HOA bylaws. They follow instinct. And instinct told them exactly what I had the moment I saw her step onto this island. She didn't belong. She never did. And now, the island agreed.